Hi, welcome to North Shore Journal, where we bring you exciting and fascinating people, places, and events of your North Shore. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Walt Kosmowski. I'm very excited to have as my guest today North Shore resident Rich Wilson. Rich is an author. He's an entrepreneur, having started up several businesses. He's an innovative educator, and he is a sailor extraordinaire who has sailed across the world. He has several world sailing records to his credit, and he's been in the news recently, having just completed the 2004 Transat across the Atlantic Ocean race. Rich, thank you for joining us on the show.
Nice to be here, Walt. Thank you.
Rich, let me ask you, how did you get started sailing, and how did that segue into this exciting, fascinating business that you're in?
Well, I started sailing when I was a young boy, and my dad started to learn to sail when he was in his mid-40s, so he didn't start when he was a kid, and he got to be very good at it, and I learned from him, but I also took sailing lessons in Marblehead at the Pleon Yacht Club, junior sailing club there, learned how to sail, learned how to race, and just worked it up from there.
Now, you've sailed, according to the press releases, you've sailed about 60,000 miles in the last 10 years, and by my high school math, if you do it's about 2.25 times around the world. That's quite a lot of miles logged out on the ocean by yourself.
Yes, well, actually, most of those miles were at least double-handed. There was somebody else on board with me, so it wasn't solo. But yes, the purpose of those voyages, we did 3 very long voyages, 15,000 miles each, where we were trying to break clipper ship records, and the purpose of that was to use that adventure as a hook to be able to teach about science and world history, geography, math, oceanography, and so forth, by linking the voyage into schools, both through newspaper and education departments of newspapers and through the internet as that came along.
Right, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that here in a second. Now, as I understand it, as you pointed out, some of these records that you broke were 150 years old, that were set by the clipper ships in the heyday of sailing.
Yes. And spectacular records they were, because here we are 150 years later with a modern trimaran, with modern materials, modern navigation, modern food, clothing, and so forth. And the second 2 of those were incredibly close races, where we only broke the record by 24 hours in one of them, and the second one, Hong Kong to New York, the lead changed hands 7 times.
Well, it's quite exciting. Now, I'm going to ask you to describe the Transat 2004 race briefly. Tell us what that's about. It's from Plymouth, England to Boston. Could you kind of describe that for our viewers?
Yes, it started in 1960. It was a bet between Blondie Hasler and Francis Chichester of half a crown as to who could race from Plymouth to New York in that year and get there. And most people didn't think it could be done single-handed. The race has run every 4 years since then. There were 5 competitors the first time, and this time there were 40 boats in the fleet. The record has gone from about 45 days for Francis Chichester that first time down to it was 8.5 days this time, and that's the advance of technology. The big trimarans now are averaging, Michel Desjoyaux, who won the race this time, averaged 16.5 knots through the water.
Which is just
spectacular.
Which is incredible. Now, I understand your boat averaged about 9 knots?
Yeah, about 9.5 knots, and that was about as hard as I could go.
Now there were, what, about 35 boats that took part in the race?
Yes.
Okay. Now we have we have a tape queued up in the control room. And I'm going to ask you to watch the monitor here with me. And this is the Great America 2, and I'm going to ask you to kind of describe what we're looking at here, if I could. There we go.
Yeah, so the Great American 2 is a trimaran, 3 hulls. The windward hull is usually up out of the water, as you can see there. And the idea of the pontoons is that that's what keeps the boat upright, rather than having a keel hanging down underneath, which is how monohulls stay upright. And that allows you to get by with a much lighter boat. And so if you have the same sort of a sail plan, same horsepower, in essence, with a lighter vehicle, the boat will go faster. So she's going along here, probably just 6 or 7 knots in pretty light conditions, the full mainsail's up and the full jib. And one of the other things you can see is that the boat doesn't heel very much ever, because you really can't push that pontoon underwater. And when I first started sailing trimarans, what first struck me was that it really helped your fatigue, that you weren't always fighting the 20 or 30 degree heel of a monohull.
Now describe these propellers that we're looking at here.
Those are wind chargers that generate electricity. We have 2 on board, and the modern versions of those, if you put 20 knots of wind through it, can put out 14 or 18 amps, which is enough to run all the electricity requirements on the boat, autopilots and so forth.
Now, does a boat like this have to have a lot of modifications so that you can sail it single-handedly?
This boat actually was designed to be sailed single-handed, and so all the lines come back into the cockpit. The reefing system is reasonably straightforward, but it's really set up that way to be sailed either single-handed or double-handed. The Frenchman who had the boat built, it was designed by Nigel Irons, who's an Englishman, sailed it in the single-handed transatlantic race back in '92, and before that in the double-handed transatlantic race, and also another single-handed race from France to the Caribbean.
Right. Now, I think we also, if we continue the tape, I think we can see underneath the inside. Are we going to show that or not? Okay, I guess maybe we're not going to show that. Rich, right at the very start of the race, you had an unfortunate mishap literally 2 hours into the race. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, yes, my mistake completely. We broke the main halyard, which is the piece of line that goes up inside the mast, comes out at the top, and then pulls the mainsail up, when the mainsail is the mainsail. So when that line broke right up at the top at the splice, and mainsail fell down just after we'd passed Eddystone Lighthouse, which was about 10 miles into the race. It was the first mark of the course. And so that was just a devastating blow.
So you had to make a decision whether to repair it or to return to port.
I actually started to consider how I could get up to the top of the mast, and I can do it, but in the sea conditions that we had, it was a pretty nasty day. It would have been, I don't think I could have gotten up to the top of the mast. So I had to return to port. I got back to dock about 8 o'clock, and as is the spirit of the sailing community and the shorthanded community in particular, there were 3 guys at the dock when I arrived who were ready to help fix this problem. Actually, four guys, and we worked straight through the night until about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we had got to get the halyard out because 100 feet of the line had fallen back down inside the tube, and we couldn't get it out. We got about 40 feet of it out, and then the other 60 feet got jammed. So then from 3 o'clock till 7 o'clock in the morning, I worked with just one guy to get the new halyard in, and then I left the next morning.
So you were essentially, what, about 16 hours behind the rest of the competitors? And you had stayed up all night, so you entered the race 16 hours behind, and with basically a whole day's sleep deficit.
That's right.
What was going through your head at that time?
Well, a couple of things. One was I felt a tremendous responsibility to the event to get back into it as quickly as possible, to my competitors in Class 2 multi-hulls, because it's not going to be as much fun if I'm at the dock for them to race. They want to try to beat me, and so I've got to get back into it. To all the school children that were following in our Sights Alive program, and as well to the guys who stayed up all night long in the rain and the cold to make that repair. And so for the next day, basically, through that day, I pushed the boat harder than we've ever pushed it before to get back into it.
Now, getting back to the race, what kind of weather did you encounter? My understanding is that you just faced one storm after another continuously practically through the whole race. You want to describe that for us?
Sure. Well, I think that going from England to the U.S., you're going against the weather system, so they're going past you. Yeah. So if you're making progress to the west, they're going to the east, then you go through lots of weather conditions, not like you go along with one. And the first day it was pretty windy. Then we had 2 major depressions along the way. The first one, the fleet pretty much went to the south of it, so we had headwinds. The second one was a massive low-pressure system that stretched all the way from Newfoundland to Ireland, and a bunch of us at that point went up and around the center of it, so we ended up pretty far north, up at 52.5 degrees north. It was cold up there.
Well, speaking about being up north, now you had to navigate at one point around some icebergs. Now, that has to be pretty intimidating. Tell us about that.
Well, it was that's one of the I guess the beauties of this race is that you have that sort of encounter. or potentially. What was really good was the icebergs flow down past Labrador and Newfoundland in the Labrador Current, and they extend out a little bit south of Newfoundland usually, and sometimes extensively south of Newfoundland. And we had to either go through the iceberg field if you want the direct route, or you go around it. And when I got there, what had been useful was one of the Class 1 multi-hulls had suggested to the rest of the fleet that there'd be a gentleman's agreement that everybody go south of 47 north, 47 west to stay out of the iceberg field. And almost everyone subscribed to that notion, and I did as well.
Okay, so that took that option out of there.
Well, it took it out of it momentarily, because I did go south of that, but then coming across the Grand Banks, got driven up north a little bit by the wind, and I was in a place of thick fog, cold, big seas, wind, and being pushed back into where the icebergs were, and it was pretty scary.
Now, you were telling me earlier that you got to the point there, you manipulating the lines and what have you, that your hands literally almost froze if you couldn't take a lid off of a coffee cup.
That's right, yeah. I think that what happens is your skin on your hands just gets abraded off, and you get pretty far down towards the nerve endings, because the other competitors that I talked to afterwards all had the same problem. Yeah.
Now, at one point, you had a near collision, as I understand it, with a whale, which turned out to be a whole pod of whales.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, we were going along. This was actually fairly early on, and I was standing in the cockpit, the boat's on autopilot. I'm looking ahead, just sort of calibrating how the boat's doing, and I suddenly saw an eddy in the water just off the starboard pontoon bow, and I knew it wasn't something that was a wave action. It was something live in there, and so I thought it was maybe a whale, because the trimarans come up, they don't make much noise in the water. That's why they go so fast, or it's a result of going, they're eased through the water, and so the whales don't hear you. And so I braced for an impact, and then there were two pilot whales came up, and they surfaced between the main hull bow and the starboard bow, and they must have been just as surprised as I was, because somehow they got out of there without running into the boat.
That's about as close as you can. And from the
incredibly agile, those two.
So from the film we saw earlier, it was between the main hull and your pontoon. That's as close as they were. Incredible. Now, before we get back to the race, obviously with all these things going on that we've been talking about, how do you prepare physically and mentally for something like this?
Well, I think you have to get as fit as you can possibly get, and I'm not a big, huge, strong guy, but I spent a lot of time in the pool at the Cape Ann Y getting fit, and then the fitness room. And then I was lucky when we got to England after the qualifying sail to the Azores and then the delivery up to Plymouth. We stayed in the guest house that was right off a big park in Plymouth, and I'd go out every morning at 6 o'clock for a run, and I found a nice tree where I could do my chin-ups and so forth.
I wonder what the staid British thought about this American doing chin-ups on the tree in the garden.
It was the Royal Marine at the Royal Citadel there that I said hello to every morning that wondered what was going on.
Now lack of sleep during a race like this, it was 15 days you were out at sea. Lack of sleep is a real issue. Now, I know you've worked with a sleep specialist. Tell us what kind of you developed to combat that.
Yes, well, I was working with Dr. Claudio Stampi, who has been a skipper around the world race boat, but is also an MD and PhD, and specializes in sleep and working with sailors. And for about a week or so before we headed off, I was wearing a wristwatch-like device that's a recording accelerometer, and that downloads data afterwards into a laptop, and you can analyze when I've been asleep and when I've been awake. And there are certain strategies that you try to follow, because you don't want to go down and sleep for 5 hours. The boat's going to sail by itself and might run into something. So you try to do these, what they call cluster naps, where you sleep for 30 minutes, wake up, take a look around. If everything's okay, go back to sleep, and you can kind of regain where you were in that sleep cycle without having to start all over. You don't wake up fully. You don't have to get all the way back from being fully awake to fully asleep, and so it makes it more efficient. So
when you come back to port, when you're home in Rockport, how many hours a night do you sleep?
Well, I was sleeping about 6 hours a night. It was my norm beforehand, and it got down to, I think, the first about 5 days of this race, with that first 40 hours was like an hour and a half a day, and then it worked up. The next 5 days I was doing 3.2 hours in 24, and Claudio kept sending emails, "You got to sleep more," and he was right.
Now you've mentioned several times the Sites Alive website and the Sites Alive Foundation, and this is very interesting. Thousands of children, and including myself, watched the progress of your race on the web, and you filed audio reports and filmed videos. Tell us a little bit about the Sites Alive Foundation and the Sites Alive website.
Yeah. I used to be a school teacher in Boston. I taught at the Hyde Park High School back in the 70s, and whenever I would bring real-world examples into the classroom, I taught math, the kids were always much more interested. And so it took a while between then and back in the early 90s when we tried this idea, which was to go off and do a real letter-up adventure that would have as an integral part of it science and math and geography and history and oceanography and on and on and on. And we tried to break a record from San Francisco to Boston. And the idea was if you hook kids with the adventure, they're paying attention.
Sure.
Then you can slip them all this stuff. And it worked spectacularly well. So we, for this voyage, we published a 10-part series in 11 newspapers in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And then newspapers get delivered to classrooms on the day of our piece's publication. That's one connection, and then a very comprehensive website. And what I was so pleased with on this time was that I knew I wouldn't be able to generate as much content being single-handed, but we were able to put together a spectacular coalition of content partners, museums like PBS Essex Museum, Museum of Science, New Bedford Whaling Museum to write about maritime affairs, 3 Merchant Marine Academies, Mass Maritime, U.S. Merchant Marine, New York Maritime Academy, and 4 hospitals to write about asthma, which I have, sleep, nutrition.
Which you didn't have.
Which I didn't have, and emergency medicine. And so we had all these other experts, our team of experts, writing for the kids, answering questions for the kids. We had 2 admirals, 4 doctors, 3 museum presidents, and
how wonderful.
That was the
Just adds such a bigger dimension to this thing. Now, we talked about the website, and I think we do have queued up in our control room some actual footage that you filmed. It's a very short footage, but it gives you the idea of moving through the water at the speed that you were. And maybe I'd like to ask our control room to run that for us now. This is actually right off the website. And this is the Sites Alive website. And what are we looking at?
Okay, well, here we're going along on port tack. The starboard pontoon is down. Boat's going along pretty quickly. One of the reasons the clips are so short is that our iridium connection to be able to send these back is only 2.4K, 10% of a 28K modem. So the file sizes have to be pretty small.
But I think as opposed to the first clip we saw, which was you in calm water, kind of a publicity clip, this gives the viewers a chance to see what it was really like to have that wind whipping through there. Now you did reach a speed of almost 21 knots as I read about the race, and I understand that some of the winds that you experienced there were up to 45 knots.
Yes, in the second low pressure system, we actually had an incident where we got going down a wave very fast. We had 3 reefs in the main, which is as little mainsail as you can have without just taking it down completely. And the staysail, which is our smaller jib, with 6 rolls in it on the roller furling. So we had almost no sail up, and still we went down a wave about 18 knots or so. Just sort of spun out. The boat would just go so fast and went into a trough, and it buried the main hull bow and the port pontoon, the main hull back to the mast and the port pontoon back to about the aft crossbeam, and just stood the boat up. And very scary. That was I pulled a survival suit out after.
Now let me ask you this: when you started out in the race, did you have some sort of general strategy of how you would race, and then, given all these conditions, we've been talking about the storms and so forth, and your relative position with regard to the other boats, how did you adjust your strategy during the race?
Well, the strategy was, of course, because a race that's this long, if you can get into a new weather system before the rest of the fleet, then you have an advantage. So everyone takes off going as fast as they possibly can to try to get that advantage. Of course, I ended up back at the dock, so when I went out again, I had to even go doubly fast. But I think that is a strategy, and I was able to catch up to a bunch of the boats in my class, all except for one, ultimately. But then you're looking at weather maps that are coming in all the time, and we have special software on the boat that will show animated weather moving across the screen, and you pick your route accordingly.
Now, did you know your position relative to the other boats, so you know exactly where you were, or you didn't?
We did for about 12 hours a day. Every 2 hours from 0300 GMT to 1700 GMT, the race office would send out the positions of the fleet. And then they'd have a blackout period during the night. So if you wanted to try to do something sneaky and head off in another direction, you could do it, and your competitors wouldn't know.
And then all of a sudden you'd show up in somebody else's screen. Where did he come from?
Right, right.
Now, most people, including myself, are rather risk averse, and I think myself, as well as these other folks, would describe what you do as pretty dangerous. And what are the greatest risks in your mind? And I know we talked earlier about how you minimize risk. Tell us your approach.
What I was afraid of for this voyage was the sleep issue and the fact that you're not able to stand to watch all the time. But so that's going to be 4 hours out of every 24 or so. But I don't consider myself a daredevil. I don't consider myself a risk taker. I think the whole point of this is to minimize risk, and you do that by having backup systems on board, by knowing your boat incredibly well. We've sailed the boat 60,000 miles, so the sail maneuvers were not going to be an issue for me. I know how to do that. I have great confidence in that. But I think some of the other things, like the autopilot, if something goes wrong with that and it's electrical, are you going to be able to fix it? The boat's going to be going along some configuration. I don't really see it as, I see it as minimizing or managing the risks. That's really what it is.
Now, in your years of sailing, I'm sure that you must have had any number of close calls, and I do recall reading that you did set the world record going from San Francisco to New York around Cape Horn in the tip of South America, but you did that. You had to do that twice, and I believe you did lose Great America 1, or the Great America, the original ship. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's a story that usually takes a long time to tell in detail, but the brief version was we were going San Francisco to Boston around Cape Horn. We got into a tremendous storm west of Cape Horn. We ran in terrible seas from a Monday through a Thursday, and seas that built up to 20 meters, 65 feet was the official height estimate of the seas. And eventually on Thanksgiving Day, 1990, we were rolled over upside down, about 400 miles west of Cape Horn. A wave came along about an hour and a half after that and threw the boat back upright. And what I remember from that was being inside the boat, in a survival suit, getting launched, bouncing off the floor, which was over my head, getting knocked out. When I came to, I was underwater, flailing around. I found something with my feet, pushed off, came to the surface, and now I was still inside the cabin. But the ceiling was back over my head, and the water was up to about here. So Steve Pettengill, who's with me, and I got out into the cockpit, and because we didn't know if the boat was going down or not. But one of the advantages of the multi-hulls is that they have a lot of watertight compartments. We had 12 watertight compartments in that boat. Only one was suspect, so the boat wasn't going to sink. We set off the emergency beacons, the satellite beacons, and 17 hours later, the New Zealand Pacific, which was the largest refrigerated container ship in the world, about the size of the Hancock building if you laid it down inside, found us, came alongside, and we had a chance to jump to a rope ladder.
Now, so you did actually lose consciousness during this episode?
Briefly, yeah.
And Steve as well, or?
I don't know.
You're not sure. And as I understand it, the ship eventually washed up on South Georgia Island in the South Atlantic, which is where Shackleton actually made land,
Right. We were able to track the boat for a couple of months. There was a solar-powered beacon on board, and we were going to send a tug out to try to get the hull and bring it back into Punta Arenas in Chile. But 5 days before the tug was available, the Argos went out. And a year later, we heard from somebody who had been down on South Georgia Island that she had washed up there. And arriving about 25 miles south of where Shackleton landed, I figured she was in good spiritual company.
Now, getting back to the Transat race, now at the end of the race or through the race, it was kind of nip and tuck between yourself and 2 or 3 other boats, and you eventually did come in second after about 15 days. Describe the last couple of days or last phase of the race for us.
Well, I think that I got back into the pack after a couple of days. And one of the things that was great, I think, about this sort of event is the camaraderie that develops among the skippers. And I ended up having a little mini race with a boat named Jiffy in the middle of a Dominic Dimaschi. And in the middle of all this, while we were kind of going back and forth, trading the lead between ourselves, Dominic sent me an email, and it was terrific. It was just, "Hi, Rich, how are you? How is your boat? My boat is good. You know, isn't this fun?" And so here it is, two staunch competitors out there, and that was great. But I was able to catch him and pull out a little bit towards the end, but it was a fun.
Now there was a committee, or there was a lot of people at Rose Wharf in Boston, where you made landfall.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, to sail back into your hometown home port is really the best, and we had no plans to do this race. The race always goes to Newport. They changed the finish port this time to Boston, and that's what triggered it for me. I really felt like it was almost a civic obligation to be in the race, because I thought we could do something really good with coming back into Boston and with the school program. But to see Boston Harbor, the finish line was actually inside Boston Harbor off Deer Island, so I had to weave my way through the islands off Hull there, but was able to come in pretty fast, doing about 15 or 18 knots. It was a good show for everybody. It was fun to get home.
Now you won or you came in second in your class.
Yeah.
Now the winner of that class, I understand that his strategy worked. The strategy
Right.
he got out in front of the storms and never had to look back. I guess. Now did he actually set a record for Transat?
Yes, actually the first, I think, 3 boats broke the previous record, including ourselves. And when I say ourselves, I say we as the royal we, between me and my shipmate, which is the boat. I wasn't out there alone. But yes, Eric Brunel did a terrific job. He had a purpose-built boat. It was just built a year ago. It was very light, sort of small 50-footer, not much in it, and he sailed impeccably. He had been the sport catamaran champion of France at one point. And the French are huge into this sport. You know, the big trimarans are almost all French, and they're incredible advances in technology and innovations. And so a lot of the sailors just spent a lot of time looking at these other big boats now to get ideas for the future. Yeah, really interesting.
Now, what are your near-term plans? Any plans for any races? You're going to stick around Rockport, the North Shore? What's in the near future?
Well, I think the plans are to get back into the office and see what other kinds of school programs we could put together with some of these content partners that we now have a working relationship with, and we don't have right now plans for the boat for any other races. Races for the larger trimarans are few and far between, so we'll have to see.
Now, where do you keep the boat? Where is the Great America II now, and where is it going to be staying?
She's in Marblehead on a mooring out by the lighthouse, so you can go down to the lighthouse and take a look.
If any of our viewers want to come out and see the boat, they can. Where should they go to see the boat?
Marblehead Lighthouse out on Marblehead Neck is a good place. It's just about 100 yards or so from there.
Okay. And again, the site's alive. If they want to review, if our viewers want to review this race, it's www.
Sitesalive.com. That's S as in Sam, ITESALIVE.com.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Rich, thank you for being my guest. What a wonderful story. Our guest has been Rich Wilson, who has just competed in the 2004 Transat race across the Atlantic. Thank you for joining us on North Shore Journal. I'm your host, Walt Kosmowski, and we'll see you next time.